Hello and welcome to the Absolute Beginner Guitar Lesson Series. My name is Oliver and today's lesson is lesson number 22. Today's lesson is, I believe, the fourth in a series of lessons that are sort of centered around chord voicing. In lesson 19, if I'm not mistaken, we discussed inversions. And then in lesson 20, we discussed how ways we can use chord voicing to make our playing more interesting. And in the last lesson, we kind of dug deep to see how we could begin to use chord voicing to make our playing easier. And this lesson is sort of a continuation on that theme. And what we're going to do is we're going to just sort of apply what we've learned to just a couple of chord progressions. Now, for anyone who is not familiar with chord progressions, you may want to go back and watch lesson number 9. It was a whiteboard lesson, and we discussed what chord progressions are, how they're used, and I also went over several chord progressions, and hopefully those of you who have watched that lesson wrote those progressions down. So the first chord progression I want to look at is the 1-4-5 chord progression. The 1 chord in the key of C major is C major because C is the first note of the scale. And the 4 chord, the fourth note of the scale is F. So the 4 chord is F major. And the 5 chord is G major. We start out with our C major chord. So the next chord in our progression is the F major chord. And what we really want to do here is we want to try to find root notes that are close together. So my root note for the C major chord is at the 1st fret of the B string. And I want to find an F note that's close to it. Now I can find F on the B string up at the 6th fret. And that's not too far away, but we can find a closer F note at the 1st fret of the E string, right? F major chord. And finally, we have the G major chord. So I'm at F, and I'm just going to slide this chord up 2 frets. So my root note is on the G note at the 3rd fret, and I have my G major chord. So as you can see, all of our chords are fairly close together. We're not having to move up and down the neck a lot to play the chords. Now, the thing about this is we are using different chord fingerings. So it's going to take you some time and practice to get used to going from one chord fingering to another chord fingering. But I think this is very useful practice. And just as an aside, when you play this progression with the 1, 4, and 5 in it, I want you to keep in mind that we can interchange these numbers to change the progression around. And it works pretty well. So for example, I could change that to 5, 4, 1, where now I start with my 5 chord, which is G major. Then I go to my F chord, and then I finish up with my C major chord. And that's just an example of how we could work these chords. And also, with this 1-4-5 progression, what we can do is we can turn it into 1-4-5-1. So now we'll play the C major chord, go on to the F major chord, the G major chord, and then we return to the C major chord. And we get a little bit more of a complete statement. So that's how we could play that chord progression starting with our root note on the B string. However, we could start with our root note on other strings. So if we wanted to start with our root note on the G string, we would find our C note at the 5th fret of the G string, and we would apply our major chord fingering, and now we have our C chord. That's our 1 chord. Now the next chord is F. So again, what we want to do is we want to find a root note that's pretty close to where we already are. And I could play the F at the 1st fret and with the root note at the 1st fret of the E string, and there would be nothing wrong with it. And that's an option that you have. However, if I'm looking at my C major chord fingering, I can see that I have an F note at the 6th fret of the B string. So I'm going to go to that F chord, and we have, and then finally for my G major chord, I'm just going to slide that F chord up 2 frets. So my root note is now at the G note at the 8th fret of the B string. And then just to complete the circle, I'm going to go back to where I started with the C major chord. And of course, we could play this progression starting with our root note at the 8th fret of the E string. So if I find my C root note at the 8th fret of the E string, and then I apply my major chord fingering, I have my C major chord, my 1 chord. Now the 4 chord is F. So I'm looking for an F note that's close to my where I'm playing right now. And on the G string, at the 10th fret, I have the F note. So I'm going to opt to switch to my having my root note at the 10th fret on the G string, and now I have my F major. And from here, I can just slide that up 2 frets, so my root note is at the 12th fret on the G string, and now I have my G chord, and I'm going to return to where I started with my root note at the 8th fret on the E string. So as you can see, depending on where we start, the best chords to play in terms of economy of motion will change. And this is what I want you to start working with. What I'd like you guys to start doing is I would like you to start practicing your chord progressions and using chord voicing. It's not something that's difficult. You just need to take your time. You know the notes and you know the chords. And even though you may not be able to find the notes quickly or switch between the chords quickly, we can still work on learning how to voice these chords to make our playing easier. So that's it. That's about it for the lesson. Put in your time, put in your work, and I hope to see you there. Peace.